Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this virtual event organized by Euractiv and financed by the European Commission called EU Agri-Food Policy, Navigating the Next Policy Mandate. My name is Ana Gumbau, and I have the pleasure to be moderating this exciting and really timely discussion on the future of the EU agri-food policy in the context of the EU elections. In this past EU policy mandate, we've seen a strong push towards greener policies for the agri-food sector, with focused on environmental requirements, but this has been met also with a lot of resistance. And striking a balance between the needs of farmers, consumer demands and sustainability remains a significant challenge that will likely define the next European Commission mandate. So today we'll be discussing what can we learn from this policy mandate that is coming to an end and what we could expect from the next one. How can the EU election impact the next agri-food policies? This discussion comes at a very important time because the EU elections, as you will all know, are just around the corner, and the results of it will shape the future of EU policies, also for the agri-food sector, but also because today farmers are protesting in Brussels again under this political context. This discussion is highly important, and it's been really very much anticipated by our audience because this shows by the number of people registered. It's been more than 650 of you who have registered for today's event. So thank you very much for joining us, for tuning in, and for your trust in this discussion. Today we're going to be starting this event in a slightly different way than we are used to, because we have our team of Euractiv reporters live from the epicenter of the protests in the Atomium. And I would like to start this discussion by giving the floor to our reporter, Sofia Sanchez Manzanaro. Sofia, what's the feeling like?
Good morning, Anna. Yes, so you can see my backdrop, the Atomium, this iconic view in Brussels, and that's where farmers, hundreds right now and soon thousands, have chosen to gather today in this pre-election demonstration. So they are farmers organized by the Farmers Defence Force, which is this group that was created in the Netherlands in 2019, but is now present also in Belgium. And we can call them the more hardliners compared to the most influential groups like Copa Cogeca, that it has been traditionally more associated with the center-right. The Farmers Defence Force is also against the European Green Deal, against new trade agreements with third countries that could impact or flood the European markets with cheaper products and put our local farmers to a disadvantage. But this morning we've seen, hundreds of tractors coming in before 9 a.m. into the Atomium. We estimate now that there will be around 300, 400 tractors. They were hoping to get to 2,000 according to the organization. But they will keep coming in through the day. We were also quite surprised to see a lot of young people. And when I say young people, I mean 16 to 18 years old. They are also farmers, part-time farmers. I assume they work with their families. We talked to them, and they are mostly from the Netherlands. They also complain about the nitrogen policies of the Netherlands, something that has been very controversial for the farmers in the country, that is also linked to EU legislation on nitrogen emissions. So we can say that these protests are motivated by national grievances and also European. We will keep reporting from here through the day. So just keep following our coverage in our website if you want to know more about the protest.
Thank you very much, Sofia, for connecting with us. And indeed, for everyone, please be sure to follow Euractiv's coverage of the protest ongoing today. Thanks a lot, Sofia, for joining us. Now, with this introduction and scene setting from Sofia's side and for our team of Euractiv reporters, we can kick off our panel discussion. And I'm delighted to be introducing our panelists that will be joining us today in, again, this very exciting and timely discussion. So let me start by introducing and welcoming the Head of Unit for Policy Perspectives at the European Commission's DG Agriculture, Gijs Schildhuis. Welcome. Also with us is the member at the European Economic and Social Committee in its section for Agriculture, for Rural Development and the Environment, and also the President of the Beef Breeders Association of Bulgaria, Stoyan Chukanov. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Also with us is the Director for Nature, Health and Environment at the European Environmental Bureau, Faustine Bade-Fossé. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Also joining us is the head of program for CAP and Food at the Institute for European Environmental Policy, Harriet Bradley. Welcome.
Thank you. Morning, everybody.
Joining us as well is the Senior Food Policy Officer at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, Emma Calvert. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. And last but definitely not the least is the editor for EU Agriculture and Food Policies at Euractiv, Angelo Di Mambro. Welcome, Angelo.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks.
So I would like to start with each one of you outlining some reflections really of the past 5 years of the EU's policy mandate when it comes to agri-food policies. As mentioned before, we've seen a strong push towards greener policies, but these have been met with a lot of resistance. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this past 5 years, and in particularly this past year or so, these past months, that are also going to shape and influence the future of these policies? Maybe Gijs, we could start with you.
Thanks. Great to be here, and thanks for the start with the live images from the demonstration. So I think this underlines really the importance of this topic also for the elections and for political debates, and I think that's the case throughout the EU. Earlier this year, we saw farm demonstrations in many places in Europe. But let's also not forget, and you're asking about the mandate, let's also not forget that we saw also many demonstrations to have better climate policies throughout this mandate, maybe different constituencies, but that also relates to some extent to agriculture. So I think there is a strong debate in society around food and farming, and this has become increasingly polarized. And I think that's one of the lessons that we have drawn clearly from this mandate, that we need to show and we need to work to make agriculture and protection of natural resources go together. And we must work this together, and we must strengthen dialogue. And that's one of the things that we have tried now, or that we're trying now. President von der Leyen has launched a strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture in her State of the Union address last September, and this has started in January, and this is now ongoing. And we really hope that this strategic dialogue, which brings together 29 key EU organizations in food, farming, and environment, and the entire sort of food system, that this will create a basis for policy making in the new mandate that will which will allow us to overcome that polarization, because we must get more young farmers to start farming. We must get farmers and help farmers to farm more sustainably. We must help farmers to farm in a more resilient way. With all the weather extremes that we see these days, we really need to help them to change the way we farm, to ensure that we can have the food security we need, have the natural resources that we need in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've already noted some ideas. The fact that agriculture and protection of natural resources must go together, the future of and the outcomes of strategic dialogues, and how can we farm in a more resilient way. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Stoyan Chuganov.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks one more time for the invitation. I'm here not only as a member of the EAC, but also as a farmer from Bulgaria. And I don't know how many of our viewers are familiar with the structure of the European Economic and Social Committee. So let me just give you a couple of words, an idea what we're doing here. We are actually making comments on the legislative process coming from the Commission and going to the Parliament. And the committee is, from three groups. The group one is the employers, the group two is the trade unions, and the group three is the civil society organization. So most of those legislative proposals, actually, we have an opinion on them. So this opinion reflects what the civil society organization thinks without any political influence. So basically, now we have a demonstration, but that's just one part of the farmers, because most of the time we're speaking about the farmers like they are all the same, and that's not the case. This is one organization that is expressing themselves, and I saw them this morning. I met some of them in Place Luxembourg. There's a couple of tractors over there. So that's we shouldn't generalize and always speaking about the farmers like the polluters and somebody that is not willing to take part of the fight against the climate changes, because there is also many farmers that are supporting and the proposal and the line of the Green Deal. And just 4 or 5 years ago, we all agree on the Green Deal, although there is some farmers organizations quoting now that basically it was not a deal and they didn't agree on this. Nobody was asking them, but that's another story. That's just one point of the view. So in our comments, we are basically striking a balance in between the different views because we have also environmental organizations present here in the committee. And before we reach to an agreement, we're not sending our opinion to the parliament. And that's why we have a more balanced view on the legislative proposals, and I'm here to comment from this point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tchoukanov. And now I'd like to give the floor to Faustine Baste-Fossé.
Thank you very much. I'd like to build a bit on what has been said before, and also try to, yes, as you asked, draw some lessons from what we have seen in the past 5 years. First, it's complete nonsense to oppose farming and the environment. There is no farming without healthy environment, full stop. And as it has been reported by scientists, and more so, the main threats to food security today are climate change, as we can see happening, and biodiversity. But now, if we want to draw some lessons on what has happened in the past 5 years, very important to understand how the Green Deal came to life in the first place and why. And Hayes said a few words about that, but let's remember that back in 2018, end of 2018, when the IPCC report came out, about the 1.5 global warming degrees, we saw waves of people, of youth, thousands and thousands of people in the street marching for climate, asking decision makers to act accordingly. And that led to a strong mobilization in voters. So people went to vote for the European elections. We saw a big increase in comparison with the last 20 years, which itself led to a green wave in the parliament and ended up in the Green Deal. And the Green Deal was that project about climate neutrality, but it was a systemic project aiming at responding to the triple crisis, and that's important to insist on the word triple, which is the climate, biodiversity, and pollution crises that are interconnected and which today are our existential threat to farmers. Now we have seen recently in the last past years, strong oppositions to the Green Deal in relation to farming and proposals that were linked to farming. But let's remember that already back in 2019, there was already a strong opposition from ministers from the Council of Agriculture against linking the Common Agricultural Policy with the objectives of the Farm to Fork. There was a political decision back then already from them not to make a link. But what we have seen recently is very frightening. We've seen in particular after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, a dangerous move away from science and lots of disinformation campaigns leading to a dismantling of the Farm to Fork strategy. And more recently, what we have seen was an instrumentalization of farmers' protests that went a step further and led to a rollback of cap on the Common Agricultural Policy environmental safeguards. And what was very shocking with this rollback was that it got proposed by the European Commission the same week as the EEA, the European Environmental Agency climate risk assessment, which was clearly stating that Europe was the continent warming up the fastest and that we had to double down, not to slow down and certainly not to go backwards. And it was done without any public consultation and impact assessment. This was in total contradiction with science, but also ignoring citizens' demands, because we tend to forget, but you still have many citizens, and that's clear from the polls, actually from the surveys, that people still want more from decision makers on climate and on nature and also against pollutions. So just few thoughts on why this has happened, and I will stop after that. Well, first of all, we have a serious issues about governance here. The governance around agriculture policy is deeply concerning. Current lobbying power and institutional access of some stakeholders with vested interest, because as it was said before, we keep talking about farmers, but you have different farmers out there. The ones who have vested interest in the status quo, their power is excessive and is out of control. They've been using tactics over the past year, cynically making use of disinformation in the public debate. And as we are getting closer to the elections, farmers' demands and anger have been instrumentalized to weaken the EU, as we see also with these protests today, by those who have a strong interest in weakening the EU and the democratic project. And I have two last points, sorry.
Just,
but media
has... If you can please wrap up first because we need to move to the next
speaker. I just have two last very small points. Media has also contributed to this backlash by actually, somehow reporting the opposition between environment and agriculture in their coverage. And last but not least, and that's my last point, there was a lack of buy-in from citizens, unfortunately, in the very first place on the European Green Deal project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Faustine. You've mentioned the question on citizens demanding strong climate demands and environmental safeguards. So maybe this brings me to give the floor to Emma Calvert to also talk to us a little bit about the consumer perspective.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much to Euractiv for inviting GAEC to come and share some of our... Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting GAEC. I'm not going to sugar the pill. I think that the high levels of optimism that we had in May 2020 when the Farm to Fork strategy was published, and we finally saw a recognition from the European Commission that the current food production and consumption model that we have in the EU was no longer tenable, and we saw a pathway to a transition to a more sustainable and healthier food production and consumption model in the EU, which is something which consumers say that they want, by the way. They want to eat more healthily, they want to eat more sustainably, but they find it difficult for various barriers. So we were really encouraged in 2020 to see the Farm to Fork strategy, and it was an encouraging direction of travel. Of course, we're now in a situation where I think we can say that we are that many of the policies which were promised as part of this Farm to Fork strategy, but also beyond the strategy as well, they remain unpublished, unfinished, and unfulfilled. And Faustine already mentioned the very worrying precedent that we had back in March, where we saw the very minimal greening requirements which were part of the CAP being rolled back extremely quickly in a matter of weeks, when we know that these greening requirements as part of the CAP reform took many years of negotiations to achieve. It was done without an impact assessment, and I really hope we will not see a repeat of this in the next mandate, because we have to remember this is public money which should be going towards a public good, and this is not, in our opinion, the correct procedure to deal with these kinds of funds. I think regardless of the political temperature, the fact remains that if without having a strategy to deal with how we produce and consume food in the EU, we do not have a complete Green Deal. And we hear a lot about the potential transition and consumption. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we lost you for a second, Emma. But we'll have
okay.
You back.
Where did you lose me?
Just if you can restart the sentence again.
Okay. So I was just saying that we hear a lot about the potential costs of transitioning towards a healthier and more sustainable food system, and we don't deny that there will be some trade-offs, and we will need to see investments made. But we hear a lot less, I believe, about the current costs of business as usual, and you really only have to watch the news today or last week or the week before to see the impacts that we're having already. And I think the Farm to Fork strategy rightly recognised the need to redesign our food systems because of these externalities that we have with our current food production system, the high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, the large amounts of natural resources that are required, the resulting biodiversity loss, the negative health impacts, which are considerable, and then also the lack of fair economic returns for primary producers. And I would say this remains the same today. The science hasn't changed since 2020 or 2019. We as consumers and citizens and farmers need this just transition as much as ever for our environment, for biodiversity, but also for food security as well, as we mentioned already by Faustine, that we are already seeing serious effects of extreme weather events on our food supply. So this will only get worse the longer we wait. So we really need to make sure in the next mandate that we do not continue this status quo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. And now I'd like to give the floor to Harriet Bradley.
Thank you. So I think a lot of points have been made, but I would like to just say again that obviously farming in Europe is increasingly uncertain. I think this is driven by economic factors, but increasingly also the impacts of climate change, which are getting more and more severe. And obviously we're seeing this culminating in protests that have been going on for some months. And what's clear is that for many different reasons, this old paradigm which we had, which was around maximizing yields under stable climate conditions, is just not actually suited to the market reality and to the new climate reality that we face. So I think what we need to learn in terms of also policy responses is that we really need to put evidence back into the policy making around agriculture, because I think what we have also seen over the last 5 years is an erosion of kind of real evidence being brought into the debate and the policy responses for the farming sector and the challenges that farmers face. And what IEP has been doing is trying to look into, well, what are some of the solutions that try and reconcile food security needs, the need for farmers to have viable livelihoods and address environmental and climate challenges. And the evidence that we've been looking at shows that there are a lot of opportunities for the sector in terms of changing to a more low climate resilient, regenerative agricultural model. And so I think we need to be talking also more about these opportunities and communicating them to farmers, and also talking about, well, what is the journey that involves to get to that model. So what we've been working on is, well, what are the kind of, what's the transition pathway from conventional agricultural model, which we just see isn't working now, to a more resilient, regenerative one. And one of the key lessons is that it involves quite a lot of upfront investment costs and also significant knowledge and training. What we are saying is that actually policy hasn't been focusing on this side of the equation that much. So what we would like to see is, much more support from public policy, but also the private sector needs to contribute as well in supporting farmers on a journey of transition, which we see from the literature typically, can average at around 10 years, but it can take much less, it can take much more. So it does depend, but we're talking roughly about a 10-year transition. And the costs of that transition are far higher at the start when you have to invest in new equipment or new regenerative inputs, new knowledge, etc. So that's really where we need a plan, clear targets, a sense of, where are we actually going to, and therefore what investments do we need to make at the beginning so that we can support farmers to make that change. And then actually we see the evidence that this pays off economically for them in the long run. So farms can actually become much more profitable. But the real barrier is getting over the initial investment costs and the initial gaps in knowledge that they face. So we'd like to see a lot more focus on this in the next mandate, obviously accompanied by payments for public goods, other clear climate targets, and obviously supportive consumption side policies too.
Thank you, Harriet. I will definitely come back to the point around solutions and investment needs. But before that, and definitely not the least, I'd like to give the floor to Angelo. Angelo, what can you tell us about also, the proposals that were initially envisioned for this term? What has been left to do for this European Commission? Which proposals did make it or did not make it to the finish line? If you could recap also a little bit on that for us.
Yes, thanks, Anna. But I would say that one of the most controversial has been the nature restoration law that is now in a limbo, in a legislative limbo. Nobody knows what will happen with that. There is the EU deforestation law, the implementation of EU deforestation law. The agricultural ministers are pushing against it, pushing it for a postponement of the implementation. But the Commission seems convinced to go ahead. Why they are asking for that? Because why the farm ministers are asking for that? Because they don't want new administrative burden on farmers and on national administration. That's to be said. New genomic techniques also is another file that is pending. The European Commission, new genomic techniques are those let's say state-of-the-play biotech, agrarian biotech, that state-of-the-art, agrarian biotech that the Commission wants to regulate in a different manner compared to the GMOs. The Commission made the proposal, the Parliament adopted its position, and the file is stuck in the Council. Another interesting thing to watch, I'm talking about the short term, now we will give a look to the long term. It's the protection status of wolf, because the Commission and also a majority of countries wants this protection status to be lowered, especially for protecting livestock. Other member states are not convinced about that, and they ask for more data. This is something that it should be done by the end of the year. A decision should be made by the end of the year, because on that time, the Bern Convention will have its meeting to make a decision. But so far there is a bloc minority, so this is another uncertain file. The Commission initiated a legislative process on animal transport, but there both the Parliament and the Council have to adopt their respective positions. And on the long term, next mandate will be the mandate of the new budget, and consequently of a new common agricultural policy that will have to tackle on top of the sustainability issue, because as it has been rightly said, we started with the demonstrations for greening the economy and our systems and our economic systems, and we are finishing with the protests of the farmers. But sustainability is not going away; it's there. If you look at the most comprehensive definition of food security, sustainability is there. You cannot, as one of the former panelists said, you cannot go ahead without being sustainable in your production. On top of that, there will be considerations on a greater integration of Ukrainian agriculture. That will be important. So the next cycle will be on that from that point of view, an interesting converging period in which the budget, the CAP, Ukraine, and sustainability must be, in a sense, that all these different demands must be, in a sense, reconciled. And then the Commission in 2020, in the action plan on farm to fork, the farm to fork action plan, promised many things. Among them, there was a comprehensive review of the labeling, of the food labeling legislation. That has not happened, and okay, there were other things, but in this case, we are talking about a regulation that is 2011, so it's more than 10 years it has been enforced. When maybe it will not be easy to do, but maybe the next Commission should also look at it, at a revision of it. That's in my view, that's the state of play. Maybe I have lost. I'm missing some points. Just to one final one. The lessons we drawn. I felt that the context was missing a bit. We had in the last 5 years, we had one pandemics and one war at the gates of Europe, with very concrete and practical consequence on the wallet of citizens and the economic activities. This is something that must be taken into consideration, in my view. And one final point, because I've seen that the media are to blame, because yes, it's true, we oversimplify sometimes. We are the ones that look for the conflict and so on. But so I will introduce something boring. We are talking about the changing green requirements, always ignoring one of the reasons behind that. It is the first year of the implementation of the new model of the CAP. That means national administration are involved more than in the past. In my view, all this, let's say, this green requirement stuff should be considered also in this light. It's the first year of implementation of a new model. The new model is not working. Why? Because there is another layer of administration. I know this is boring, but this is something to be considered. Otherwise, the media are always those looking for the conflict.
Thank you very much, Angelo. I think you've given a very comprehensive view on the state of play, the lessons learned, and also the way forward. Now it's time to launch our panel discussion, and for that we would also welcome your questions from our audience online. You can connect. You will appear just in a second in your screens. The QR code on Slido, so you can either scan the QR code or use the hashtag 24-29 on slido.com. So you can connect to us either way. And we'll try to get as many questions as possible, because again, this event has been highly anticipated. We've got a lot of registrants and many of you who have joined us in this discussion, so we should have ample time for questions. But I would like maybe to pick up on some of the points that Angelo mentioned in terms of the Commission agenda and some of the future priorities, and understand really what's the way forward then for these policies, and even despite or regardless of the outcome of the next elections, whether these points are still going to be in the agenda, and to which extent are they going to be in, or expected to be in, the next mandate and next policy cycle. So maybe, Gijs, you have some thoughts on this that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, well, the first message on the next mandate is that everybody should go and vote, because that really matters. That really matters in this field, and that's when people like me who work in the administration get their instructions from the politicians. So I think we need to make that absolutely clear. So that's everybody's task, all the 650 that are listening. I was very happy with Angelo's points at the end, saying, because I noted down some of the comments in the first round, and I was like, but wait a minute, since 2020 we had indeed COVID, we had the war in Ukraine, we had major energy price increases. We had food inflation like we hadn't seen for decades. And through all that, as Commission, we try to keep the sustainability transition agenda on the rails, and that requires negotiation, that requires calibration, etc. So clearly, I think if you look at the overall picture of what we have achieved with the Green Deal, it's very positive. But it's a change of a lot of aspects of how we live together, how we organize our economies, and it's clearly been maybe more successful in the area of climate and energy than in food. But also it's not one mandate. So clearly for the next mandate, I think we need to try to continue to create policies for food and agriculture that help with this transition, because it's necessary. I mean, I agree with everybody on the sustainability, the climate aspects. It's necessary. We must do that change, but we must do it together with people. So why did the Commission, for example, this spring propose to change some rules? Because we need to get farmers along to work in more sustainable ways. And if they're on the street protesting, and if the rules are just too complex to apply, clearly we are not achieving our objectives. So we had to make some adjustments. And by the way, there was no time for an impact assessment. But I would like to recall that we had a wide majority in the Council, one abstention, and a wide majority in the European Parliament. So I think this clearly had democratic backing. So the real challenge for the next mandate is to come with policies that help citizens to get along, farmers, but also consumers. And that's maybe one of the areas that you referred to just now. Is that in the area of you mentioned labeling, but other aspects of how consumers act in the supermarkets, on the marketplace, how they buy and consume their food. We need to help consumers to make more sustainable choices, and that is clearly something where we need to try to come with policies that work. Also because it helps farmers to farm more sustainably. The signals through the marketplace are super important. With subsidies, we can do many things, but in the end, we need private sector. So overall, if you look at the farm economy, 20% of revenue from farmers comes from subsidies, 80% from the market. So obviously, if you want to create more sustainable food supply chain, if you want to create more sustainable demand, you have to work together with private parties. And so I think that is typically an area where we need to do much more in the next mandate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gijs. I think I saw Stoyan's hand raised before.
Yes, because probably it's my turn to mention about the elephant in the room. As a farmer, although that's part of the package proposed by the Commission, but I think the key point here and the key problem here is actually the value distribution along the agri-food sector in general. Because as a farmer, I have many conversations with my fellow colleagues, and they say, "All right, so you think I don't want to be sustainable? Of course I do. You think I like to pay such bills for the fertilizers, etc., etc. Yes, that's clear, absolutely. But tell me, Stoyan, what should I do with my credit? What to explain to my banker? All right, Bob, listen, I'm trying to switch my technology now to no fields and to climate observing ones. So could you write me off some of my credits? So what are we doing in this case? And that's why we are in the committee, we've been debating a lot. And don't get me wrong, my farm is certified organic. I'm not really trying to polarize the climate issues with the agricultural issues. But the fair distribution and the fair share of the profit that needs to go to the farmers, that's the key. Because otherwise, there will be no way to invest. Because otherwise, we're going to get a call from the banker to our credit, on our house, basically. Because our collateral for this credit is our house. What shall I do? What to say to my children? All right, we're going green. We're going to live in the forest. It could be fun for 2 weeks, but then, so that's why it's a financial issue, and it's not behind the subsidies. It's not a matter of more subsidies. It's a matter how to distribute the profit. And this is just the last point in the package coming from the Commission, that it's going to be tackled eventually by the end of 2025. So we started with the simplification. That's okay with the eco schemes, of course, because everybody needs to get ready for the next seeding season. That's understandable, absolutely. And we praise the Commission for this speed that they put. Basically, all the legislators, as you probably recall, that was the last vote in the European Parliament by the very last day. But that's fine, you know. But what are we doing with this problem? Because that's not only the farmers, the actors in this problem. We have the supermarkets, we have the distributors, etc., etc. And it's a very interesting statistic coming from France. You know what's the share from 100 euros spent in the supermarket for food that goes to the farmer? 6.9%. So how are we going to tackle this in the future? Because we, the farmers, we are willing to take better care of our land. Of course, we want to be a good ancestor. Of course, I don't want to pass my land and my farm exhausted and polluted. That's clear. But I have to make a living, no? So most of those protests are very well utilized. That's clear for some political fractions. That's clear. But they have a ground for this. Because if basically by the end of the day or the end of the month you cannot end up, you know, financially, and you have the bank behind you, that's a problem, and it's going to be a problem.
Thank you very much. And I'll also pick up on that point in this discussion. Before that, I know that Faustine and then Harriet want to take the floor.
Yeah, very briefly, just to come back on the point also made by Gijs. First, on the crisis and the Green Deal implementation. Well, one can say that actually the COVID crisis has somehow led to a speed up or strengthening of the implementation of the Green Deal, you know, through the recovery plans, and that was a very good answer to the crisis. For Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we saw the opposite, and we saw an instrumentalization of the war against the Green Deal, and as we were getting closer to the elections as well. And that's despite calls from scientists hammering that actually the responses to such crises and to such shocks in the future were actually in the farm to fork strategy, in the sustainable food systems law, etc. So there was strong incoherence there. Now I've been hearing farmers, you know, we've been talking about farmers and farmers, but actually there is not like one homogeneous block of farmers. There are different farmers. And, Gijs, you said that the proposals from the Commission were answering farmers' demands. But what we have seen is that the Commission has consulted with 4 groups of farmers, and 2 of them, IFOAM and ECVC, actually have come up with a letter clearly indicating that, yes, they had been consulted, but that they had not been heard. And here I'm quoting ECVC saying that abandoning the Green Deal cannot solve the problems, but rather do the opposites. And if we look at the demands from farmers in the strengths, what were them? They were not, against the Green Deal or against environmental rules. They were calling for fair prices and decent income. And what has been proposed within the CAP fast express, reform and eventually adopted is not answering those concerns. And I'm sorry to say that there was also no public consultation per se, because yes, this was, you had consulted with 4 farming groups, but not with society, with civil society, yet we're talking about public money. And there is a serious threat there about the legitimacy of that policy in the next mandate, because now there is no string attached to it. So how it is going to be justified to still spend a third of the EU budget in this sector?
Thank you, Faustine. Harriet, and then Emma.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just reflecting on the lessons learned again, I think one of the things that we clearly need is obviously preparedness. We've talked about COVID. A clear lesson from that was that actually it's much better to be prepared, obviously, than to wait for the crisis to hit. And we know that the same dynamic is happening in agriculture as well, and we're spending more and more public funds now on crisis support measures rather than preventative measures. So again, just underlining that we need to invest in a prevention and in a transition. And I think one of the things that I've also think is damaging is this changes in policy that creates a lot of policy uncertainty. So we had the farm to fork, but now we've got a lot of rollback on that. The negotiated agreement on the cap, a lot of those provisions have been undone. And you hear farmers saying, young farmers, for example, recently I heard them saying, well, we don't know what direction we're supposed to be going in. And I think it's, it's not the only organisation or body, but the EU does have an important role to play in setting the direction of travel. And I think in the next mandate, the climate targets will be a very important file there. So we need to support, a clear target for the agricultural sector to climate neutrality, but at the same time, obviously, make sure that we are dealing with the other sustainability challenges at the same time. So biodiversity loss, natural resource depletion, etc. So setting that clear sense of direction. And I think making the cap align is really key, because I think one of the issues in this mandate was also that the cap just wasn't aligned enough with the farm to fork. So the supportive policies for the farming community were not there. So it was kind of very mixed messages that you have to do all these things, and yet the cap is not actually funding you or putting the funds really where they're needed. So I think really aligning, having a clear sense of direction and aligning the cap and other policies around it to this transition, and really supporting farmers with more knowledge and the investment that I said is really key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Harriet. And Emma, I think you also wanted to take the floor.
Yes, thank you. Just to come back on what Harriet just said, we fully agree that on the supply side, we definitely need cap subsidies to really be much better aligned with the shift that we need to make and recommendations for healthy and sustainable diets. But coming back to the consumption side, he's mentioned that we need to help consumers make more sustainable choices. Obviously, we completely agree. We did a survey a couple of years ago which showed that consumers are definitely willing to eat more sustainably, but they find it very difficult for different kinds of barriers. We have price, availability, and also knowledge. And that's why we're very disappointed to not have had the fulfillment of policy proposals from the Farm to Fork, including the Sustainable Food Systems Framework Law, which would have created a more enabling environment for consumers to make those choices a bit easier. For example, the Sustainable Food Systems Framework Law, which was meant to have been brought in, that was meant to have set a clear path for the transition to a sustainable food system law, applied to across the board to all policy areas, translating the farm to fork objectives into legislative requirements, tackling the food environments, in particular the middle of the chain, because retailers, processors, etc., have a very big role to play in food environments, and policy coherence as well. And not to mention, of course, a sustainable food system or sustainable labelling framework. So if we're talking about making it easier for consumers to make a sustainable or healthier choice, we really need to see an implementation and see that picked up in the next legislature.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Emma. And I think Gijs wanted to respond as well.
Yeah, thanks. No, I couldn't resist to give some replies also to the points made by Faustine as well as Harriet. I think if we look at the demonstrations and the Commission response, I think the Commission response was multiple. So it's true that we didn't have time to do a full consultation. So we targeted our consultation on member states and for farm organizations. Obviously, when you consult organizations express views that are not all picked up. But I do wish to insist that besides some actions to simplify the CAP, we also have put on the table a whole range of actions to improve the position of farmers in the food chain, including legislative changes, including an cross-border enforcement instrument for unfair trading practices and for agri-food products. So there's a whole stream of work also ongoing to address income issues, because obviously, yes, that is one of the big topics that leads farmers to demonstrate, as Stoyan has clearly underlined. So, but that is obviously always a more longer-term challenge. And in terms of the public money, yes, the CAP is public money, so we need to make sure it's well spent, right? And we have made a considerable switch to have more strings attached, more environmental requirements. And a few of those have been made more flexible in the proposals that have now become law this spring. But overall, the budget allocations, the requirements for budget allocation, that a lot more of this money has to go for environmental measures, and that the overall minimum conditions have become stronger. All that still remains in place. So I think there is still a very strong conditionality, environmental conditionality to the payments. And you can agree, is it, are we at the right level? We will probably be debating that also in the next mandate. But I do think that the Common Agricultural Policy really has made an important shift. And then maybe on Harriet's point that there is no alignment between farm to fork and the CAP. True, there is no formal alignment between the targets that the Commission has proposed on reduction of pesticide use or more efficient use of fertilizer or organic farming. But if you look at the Common Agricultural Policy, the way it's spent, it is going a lot in the direction of these targets. So even if there's no formal link, there is has been a major shift towards more spending in that direction. The Commission itself has concluded in a report of November last year that we must make further steps, that the strategic plans of the Common Agricultural Policy, if you wish, must become more strategic. And we've identified areas where we think member states in future should focus more. So there's work to be done. But I think this policy is really going in the right direction. And obviously, as has already been remarked, we have a new multi-annual financial framework, multi-annual budget period coming up, for which we must come with a revised agricultural policy. And that means probably in the second half of next year, we need to come with proposals. So one of the big topics of debate with many of those around the table today will be precisely on that. How are we going to make sure that the path of change of the Common Agricultural Policy is moving forward, helping both nature and farmers? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I'll pick up on the question around the multi-annual financial framework. But before that, I would like to hear back from Angelo to get a sense from you. And how do you think that the upcoming elections, well, the elections actually happening already this week, are going to impact the future of the EU's agri-food policies, especially considering that we're probably going to be seeing a shift towards the right in the upcoming European Parliament. So how do you see this having an impact on the future of these policies? Do you see a continuation? Do you see change, evolution, revolution? What's your sense on that?
The shift to the right, it must be seen. So it's really uncertain. So this is one of those things that now I'm predicting things that will be are very difficult to predict. My concern is that in a more fragmented, in a more, let's say, there is a political group in the parliament that has no manifesto. All the others group have a manifesto. There is one that is no manifesto. It's ID. So this, in my view, it's not a good thing for imagining a collaboration, something, because it seems that they don't agree on many things. So my concern is that it will be more difficult to cooperate and to collaborate in case this shift happens. Also because already in recent times we have seen, let's say, that the so-called polarization of the debate on agri-food increasing instead of decreasing, and that's also something that we must take into account. As I said, the shift to the right it will be, even I mentioned the labeling, for instance, and that was not. I mentioned the labeling, and there we see every day there are national attitudes that seems not conciliable, and this has lasted for years. I mean, on for instance, on food country of origin food labeling, or on the nutritional labeling, or this is very divisive, and with, let's say, a parliament that has more members that are there to defend their national interests, I don't see how this can be solved. And the CAP is the same, and so let's see what happens. But it's gonna be more difficult, maybe.
Some thoughts on the panel on this question. Maybe Faustine would like to tell us a little bit. How do you sense this shift towards the right in the parliament?
Well, I mean, if we look at the projections, we see indeed that there is a risk of an increase of also the space taken by the far right groups, and I mean, in terms of what that would mean, we've already seen it happening now in the last couple of months. I mean, the impacts that we have seen on the Green Deal, the disinformation tactics, etc., are very much, tactics used by these parties, and we see a big risk of having more of that if they get, the scores, the good scores that are projected. But there are still a few days before the elections, and last time around it was because people got mobilized that we've seen, this strong mobilization, first of all, the highest since the last 20 years, and also this green wave and the Green Deal. So let's see whether, what we call the stay-at-home progressive people, will actually get mobilized. And because I think it's important to also look at the surveys and look at what people think, and you see across the countries that people do still care about climate and are still worried about climate and want more from their decision makers. And the same goes with nature, and the same goes with the fight against pollution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Faustine. I saw Stoyan had his hand raised.
Yeah, well, first I would like to say that the ancient people believe that trying to foresee the future is going to upset the gods. So I'm not going to try to upset the gods right now by any prediction about the outcome. I just wanted to make, probably as much as possible, put some structure in this equation and try to name some known unknowns. Because yes, we do have election in Europe in 5 days. That's okay. As I saw this morning on the Place Luxembourg, when I saw my colleagues with the camouflage pants and military boots, it's very, very obvious from which side of the spectrum they're coming. But we do have another election in November in the United States, and nobody's thinking about it. Because, all right, now the polarization and the conflict is not anymore the migration, not so much the migration. It's now the Green Deal. All right. And that's going to be the conflict in our parliament. We'll see to what degree, because of the percentage that I'm not predicting. But then we have a clear possibility for a different shift in the politics over the Atlantic. What they're going to do, I think that's the key, how our conversation here in our parliament is going to turn one way or another. Because as you probably know, in the United States, there is many legislators that are talking about the Green New Deal over there. So how are we going to align with our bigger and our ally, basically, and what's going to be the politics over there? How are we going to suddenly decide here that, all right, we're going to turn one way and they're going to go the other way? It's very important to consider that globally, 600 billion US dollars are going as a subsidies for the agriculture. But we still have 800 million people starving globally. So it's sort of, let's try to take a look more globally to those issues. Not like Stoyan's farm in Bulgaria is the epicenter of the universe. It's not the case. And I'm sure no one's farm here is the epicenter of the universe. But we have to think for the future in these terms globally. Where are we going to stay and how are we going to reform the CAP in the view of the future enlargement? And what's going to bring the accession possible in the 10 years or 15 years for European Union as a global partner? And how are we going to influence the fight against the climate change? So those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves before we go on the street. I'm talking as a farmer now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Stoyan. Emma, what are your thoughts on this? How do you see the outcome of the elections potentially influencing the outcome of our next policies? I think you're muted, Emma.
Apologies. Yeah, I think it's too soon to predict doomsday in terms of the next makeup of the European Parliament. I think we really have to wait until next week or after the elections to see, after the dust settles, what the makeup of the next Parliament will be. Obviously, we've seen the polls, and we can see that there's predictions for more of a right-wing Parliament, which could mean more conservative attitudes on sustainability and food policies. I think what we will see is that we're already seeing more of an emphasis on competitiveness already. I think we'll probably be seeing more economic argumentation, but I think there we have a lot of evidence to show the economics of why we need to move to a more sustainable food production and consumption model. We already pay a lot on top of the price that we have in the supermarket. We pay a lot for the externalities which are caused by our food production model. So whether it's AMR or obesity, overweight, that costs the taxpayer, I think it's 115 billion in Europe annually. So we are already paying a lot for the current system in Europe. What we could also see, I think, is maybe more of a defensive attitude on trade. We're already seeing the Farmers' Party, which is in the Netherlands, has a very defensive position on trade. So we already have, obviously France's position on import requirements. We could see more of an emphasis on this in the next mandate, and that is actually something that consumers can support. We did a survey recently at GAEC on consumers' position on animal welfare, which they overwhelmingly support, but they also recognize the need to be fair to farmers. So they want farmers to be supported with subsidies, but they also want them to be supported with import requirements to make sure that any products which are coming in from abroad are made to comply with the same standards which are set in the EU. So maybe there might be more of an emphasis on this in the next mandate.
Thank you, Emma. And Harriet, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you see also this agri-food agenda also fitting in or potentially either overlapping or contradicting with the competitiveness agenda? It seems that there's going to be a strong focus on the next mandate when it comes to the competitiveness side. What do you think this would leave then agri-food policies potentially?
Yeah, I think there's different angles to competitiveness. Obviously, one of them is what we're saying is that we know that the current ways of farming are actually quite insecure in terms of yields under climate extremes, and that if we have more sustainable models, then actually we can have more yield stability. So obviously that's going to make it easier for farmers to have a competitive model sort of over a more longer term perspective, rather than so much variation year on year depending on the weather. But also competitiveness. I mean, the EU is currently a major exporter of value-added agricultural products. So I think also, again, there's, sustainability and competitiveness in terms of exports can actually be complementary, because the EU is difficult for farmers to compete with the massive production of, say, soy, from Brazil, on volume. But what they can compete on with different products is on value and is on sustainability, etc. So definitely sustainability can be a competitiveness strategy for many farmers. And just, if I may, just one more point on kind of looking ahead and the different political party promises. I mean, we see in the manifestos that the main political parties are still talking about the need for there's a lot of talk of green transition in agriculture. So I really think that we need to get those conversations happening. I mean, Gijs was talking about encouraging more dialogue. I definitely think that we need to set up much more structures for better dialogue and bringing in the evidence, like I was saying earlier, so that we can take well-informed policy decisions, also so that citizens and farmers understand the implications of the decisions being taken. Just one kind of example of that is that obviously we say, if we go, obviously often we say, well, sustainable food costs more. Yes, but there's now studies showing that climate change is actually driving up food prices and making a big contribution to that. An example is the 2023 olive harvest. It was half that of the previous 5-year average in Europe. And Europe is the biggest producer of olives in the world. So if we're producing half, that's why we've seen massive increases in prices of those products, and that's going to be the same for other products severely impacted by climate. So I think we just need to bring a lot of this evidence in. What is this new reality that we're facing, and how do we actually have policies and bring in the private sector as well, in order to really future-proof our systems and support farmers and consumers in this shift to a sustainable model.
Thank you very much, Harriet. Faustine, I think you wanted to add a small point. If you could do so very briefly, please.
Just to build on what Harriet has said, and just to say that we've also done an analysis of the manifestos of the different parties, especially in relation to agriculture. This is something that people might be interested in. But just to say that what's important is to have an agenda of hope, and this is what somehow the Green Deal was about, putting hope back on the table. And here, what we've seen in the last couple of years, in the last couple of months, was an agenda of fear mostly, and this is very much also driven by the far right group. So that's very important to bring that back also for the transition for the farming sector. And we have published a Pact for the Future, which comes, which has proposals for the future of the Green Deal 2 weeks ago, and which is exactly about that. So I invite you to have a look at it.
Thank you very much. And with the little time that we have left, I would like to take then a few questions from the audience. We had a lot of them coming to us, very active audience on Slido. There's a question around the future of payments under the Common Agricultural Policy, and it's mainly addressed to Gijs, Stoyan, and Faustine. The question is, are payments based on incentivization, like eco schemes, for instance, as opposed to conditional payments like GAEC's, the future of the Common Agricultural Policy? So do we expect payments on the Common Agricultural Policy based more on incentives or on conditionality in the future? What are your thoughts on that?
Who do you want to? Okay.
Yeah, well, who's going to start?
Sorry, maybe Gijs want to get us started.
Well, sure. Very briefly, I think in the last years we've seen a move to more incentive-based payments, and also in the simplification package of this spring, we've seen a move to less conditionality, more incentive. So I think that is the trend, and what we are carefully analyzing is the effectiveness of these payments, because what we want to achieve is results, and I think what we really need to do is measure results. So besides the debate about conditionality or incentive, what we really need to do is to achieve actual results on the ground in terms of environmental sustainability, for example.
Excellent, thank you, Gijs. And then Stoyan?
Yeah, well, it's very, I think I agree with Kate, but we have to also focus on what's the time frame we're speaking about. Because in general, in our committee, in our opinion, we do agree that obviously the agriculture is not fulfilling all the requirements towards the climate. So we sort of have to repurpose the payments in a different way, in different manner. So that's already in the air. But are we speaking about just next strategic period or the one after? Because that's very important. No farmer wants to have a really sharp move because it's going to affect our productivity. And the investments are already made in place, and abandoning the way we invested is going to be a bad investment. And that's very clear. But otherwise, yes, in light of the future enlargement, etc., we definitely need to repurpose the payments going to the farmers, not lower the payments, but repurpose the way they are paid. Because with the current system, the budget is not going to really be adequate, let's say this way.
Thank you. And Faustine?
Well, first of all, it's important to draw lessons from existing policies and what we've seen with the Common Agricultural Policy, and what we tend to see that when member states are given flexibility, well, actually, they could use it for, fostering the transition, and as they could have done with the eco scheme, for instance, under this Common Agricultural Policy, they tend not to do that and to favor the statu quo. So we have actually published a proposal now months ago for the future of the Common Agricultural Policy, which we call a policy that should be about supporting the just transition towards genuine social, economic, and environmental sustainability in the farming sector. So that future policy should really be an instrument of transition, which it is not now, and eventually, as Gijs was saying, I think, pay for ecosystem services, but in a results-based orientation. So what we need is really a total shift. We need to repurpose the budget, the instruments, but also the administrative systems around the policy and the mindsets. And concretely, that means moving away from harmful measures, such as support for unsustainable irrigation, and move away from area-based income support payments and coupled subsidies, while gradually, doing that gradually and replacing that with a transition, a fund for the transition, helping farmers to move towards sustainable practices.
Thank you, Faustine. Just to also underline the fact that because of the high interest of the webinar and because the many speakers and many great speakers that we are joined by today and the many questions we got on Slido, we're going to try to extend the webinar for a couple more minutes. So thanks a lot to all of you in the audience also for staying with us. Maybe related to that and to bring back Angelo to the discussion, how do you think that this discussion on payments under CAP is going to unfold in the future? What are your thoughts on this? I'd be keen to hear from you, or also some other maybe thoughts that this discussion has sparked in you.
Well, there is a policy tool. It's like 30 years that the Commission and the Parliament have been trying to introduce, but the member states are not so enthusiastic with that. That could be of some use for redistribution, and it's the capping, a mandatory capping on direct payments. This has become to the forefront again, and Commissioner Wojciechowski was mentioning it in last December, because if we want to have a greater integration of Ukraine into the European agriculture and the European Union, we will have to face the reality of having huge, very big farms. We talk about 10,000 hectares, when the average at EU level is, I think it's 20 or something. And given that the direct payments are hectare-based payments, it will mean that most of the payments will go to Ukraine after 2034. So this is maybe something that is unavoidable to discuss seriously. You with capping at I don't know, 100,000 euros the support, the direct payments, it will liberate money also for doing something else, maybe for doing green incentives or something like that. This is something that I found interesting to recover this element. I repeat, the Commission, it's 20 years, 20 years maybe. The Commission and the Parliament try to have it mandatory, but they don't achieve, they don't succeed. But maybe this time it will be a necessity to admit that that for a fairer distribution of the aids, maybe that this system of payment is good for small-sized area. Maybe for the others, there can be some forms of incentives to investments, and because they are bigger, they can do it. I don't know. It's just an idea. Just let's see what happens.
Thank you, Angelo. I have a question specifically for Emma by Bruno Capuzzi. He's asking, Emma, you say citizens did not buy some of the Green Deal proposals. And in the case of organics, consumers EU-wide and not Brussels bubble-based also do not want to pay the price for organic products. How do you see the detachment from policy proposals from the actual demand? Or do you see a detachment there between the proposals and the actual consumer demand?
Firstly, just to clarify, I didn't say that consumers did not buy the Green Deal proposals. Actually, what we find with our GAEC survey was that consumers do want to buy more sustainably, but because of the barriers, which is maybe what I'll get into now, they find it very difficult to fulfill that wish. When it comes to organic, I think it has to come back to, again, the fact that the alternatives on the shelves, the price that we pay in the supermarket does not encapsulate all the externalities, the negative externalities that go into producing that product. If we think about organic chicken and conventionally produced chicken, obviously there are clear implications for animal welfare. When you think about conventional chicken, the need for more medicines, including antimicrobials for conventional chicken, the water, soil, and air pollution, which is caused by conventional production, and also, of course, avian influenza, a lot of which is now having to be paid for by the public purse. These are the kinds of things which are not taken into account whenever the price is set in the supermarket for conventional alternatives. Of course, organic is going to require more of an investment and will be slightly higher. I think also we were really encouraged in March when the European Commission announced that it's going to have an observatory on prices. This is something that we've been calling for a lot with our members, because what we're seeing, I think everyone will be aware of the phrase greedflation. What we're seeing is that very often the price that the farmers are paying is low, but what the consumer are paying is very high. Our Spanish member recently did a study on milk prices in Spain, and it found that prices had increased by 27% for the consumer, while lowering for the farmer by 12%. So there's clearly an issue in the middle of the chain. So that's why it's encouraging that we have this observatory for conventional products and organic products as well, to have more of transparency on price, cost structures, and distribution of margins along the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I could take another question. This one is from Sabina Kuresh, and I'm thinking that maybe Harriet and also Emma could answer this one. She's asking, what are some concrete policy measures that member states and the EU must undertake to help consumers access sustainable food? What has worked and failed so far? Maybe I can give the floor first to Harriet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a range. Obviously, quite a lot is done at national level. We see things like national food strategies. Also, yeah, green public procurement is something that can be quite an effective lever in promoting, markets for farmers to sell sustainable products into public institutions in their canteens, in schools, etc. Things like this. And yeah, I think we would say that labeling can play a role. But obviously, yeah, we also consumers, they have limited time as well. So whilst I think labeling is important, and the EU was set to make proposals there as well, it's not sufficient, because we also need consumers to be easy for them, I think, to make sustainable choices. And then I think one other really important aspect, and I think Emma mentioned it, is the pricing. So the price signals that are being sent to consumers, and obviously right now, a lot of the less sustainable products are a lot cheaper. We need to make sure that we actually send the right price signals, so that it's more it's the sustainable products become more affordable in relation to the non-sustainable ones. And there, for example, there's talk about the EU bringing in an emissions trading system for agriculture. Well, that could actually make some contribution towards sending price signals on what's a climate friendly product and what isn't. But I think we also just need to bear in mind that food insecurity in the EU today is mainly an issue of poverty. It's not an issue of not producing enough. We produce enough, but there are a significant number of food insecure households in the EU. So then it becomes a wider question as well of social safety nets to ensure that everybody has the chance to be able to afford healthy food that will increase their welfare and make their lives, obviously, and their health outcomes better.
Thank you very much, Harriet. There's so many points from what we've all discussed that I would like to pick up on, but unfortunately, time is running out. So I would like to ask each one of our speakers for one final reflection based on what we have discussed and the way forward for agri-food policies. What are your main takes of today's event, and this message that you would want also the audience to leave with? Maybe starting with you once again, Gijs.
Was listening carefully and noted that Harriet actually said the things that I had sort of in mind to close with, but I will repeat them anyway, because I think they're important points. I think the first one is evidence. When a new team of politicians is coming in at the European Parliament, the European Commission, I think we need to make new policies, but we need to make sure that the evidence is there, that we have the environmental evidence, economic evidence, everything on the table to make the best policies for the future. And then I think a key term for the next round is resilience. Climate events have already been mentioned several times, and this has repercussions, environmental, for consumers, but also for farmers and their income. So building resilience is a key term, and with that for the agricultural sector comes also competitiveness in all the ways that we've been discussing. So the competitiveness it requires also change to stay competitive in a changing climate. And then the final word is clearly on dialogue. To achieve these policies, to use and build on the evidence, we need dialogue, and therefore I do wish to underline the importance of the strategic dialogue on the future of EU farming, which is currently ongoing and which I really hope will deliver some conclusions and recommendations on which we can build in the next mandate to try to overcome a polarized debate and have a clear path forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gijs. Stoyan?
Yeah, well, I'll start where Hayes actually ended. Well, obviously the dialogue, the strategic dialogue gave some results in Germany, and that's the model that the President von der Leyen is copying now on the European level. I had the pleasure to meet Professor Schneider, and that's probably my message. We should stop opposing the environment and the agri-food production because it's just not going to get anywhere this way. So that's my call to the politicians. Stop opposing those two components because in order to be sustainable, we need both of them. We need a strategic autonomy, but we need also a healthy environment. And that's the way forward. And of course, we need to take into account the fair income for the farmers, but also the social conditionality because the farmers, it's not only one type of farmers. We have many different types of farms in different member states, and we have a difference in between south and north, east and west. So we have to take this into account, be more flexible, and give and help the farmers into this process of transition.
Thank you, Stoyan. Faustine?
Yeah, building on what's been said, a few points. Well, evidence and science, as it was said, is key. Let's hammer again, according to science, that food security is threatened mainly by climate change and biodiversity collapse. These are the main threats to food security. That Europe is the continent that is warming up the fastest. This is an existential threat, and we see that it is already impacting farmers big time. So there is no time to slow down, no time to, and certainly not to go backwards. It's time to speed up, to find the right solutions and to foster that transition. So it's very important to bring back hope on the agenda, to have that science-based agenda, but really to have hope back, to have this green and social deal in a way for farmers and for society, clear direction of travel. And last point that I want to make is that in order to have that, it's very important for people to go and vote this weekend.
Thank you, Faustine. Now, Harriet?
Yes. Well, just to say that I decided to study political science as my master's degree, having come from history, feeling like, I want to think about, well, what are the solutions to the current problems of today? And through that, I think political research also, you see that sometimes these moments of polarization that we're seeing now and really the debate coming out can actually be positive because it's really getting that societal debate around farming going, which direction are we going in? Creating those conditions to bring the stakeholders around the table and say, okay, we need to get serious now and come with solutions. So I think that's what we really need to focus on going forward. There are solutions out there. There are ones that reconcile food security and sustainability. There's still different models within it, which I think we still need to embrace to a certain extent, that there will be diversity in terms of farming models and pathways. So there is an opportunity and we need to take that. And we also have a huge agricultural budget in the EU, which can be a massive, engine of supporting farmers in the beneficial kind of changes that need to be made. And so, I think we can justify spending so much money on agriculture in Europe, so long as we obviously align those payments much better to longer term goals and sustainability and resilience. Just the what we've seen, I think, in the past is, yes, some improvements, as Gijs was saying, but not big enough changes. So what we need to see in the next CAP is a much larger step change.
Thank you, Harriet. Now, Angelo, how would you summarize the discussion?
I would say that what we are living now also these confused times show once more the kinds of tensions, the variety of tensions and conflicts that breaking down on agriculture and the agricultural sector. If it's time for dialogue, the next mandate will be time for choices. And as a journalist, I'd be curious to see what will be the choices and what will be the proposals that will be tabled to overcome this conflictual situation.
Active editorial team will definitely be at the forefront following all these decisions and in such an important timing. Now, last but not least, Emma.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I'll be very brief because I actually have another meeting now. Yeah, I think we've heard a lot about evidence, and I think we have the evidence here. What we don't have is the translation of evidence into action, and I think that for that we really need political willingness. Faustine mentioned hope, so I'm really hoping in the next mandate what we'll see is an acceleration of the shift towards healthier, more sustainable plant-based diets, which will address one of the drivers of food insecurity at the moment, which is our current food production model.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you very much to our excellent panelists who have joined us in a really exciting discussion. We've gone over time, but we thought that the discussion and because of the timing and because of the important remarks and points that have been made were worth that. So thank you very much to all of you for such an excellent discussion. Thank you very much to the many of you who have joined us online as well in this Euractiv event. And as mentioned, the conversation will continue, of course, after the elections. We have a very important date in the polls throughout this week, depending on the country you're tuning in from. But the conversation around the future of agri-food policies will continue, so be sure to follow the next Euractiv debates and the hashtag EA debates to continue the conversation. Thank you very much to the European Commission's DG Agriculture for supporting this event, and everyone have a great day.